Hello everybody and welcome to the Fire Line 114.
And today,
Look at that A. In the
The 10 Forgotten People by Bryce Bogli. Before the Society of History was wiped out, they used a device known as the Time Echolocation Machine, which they referred to as the Town. A member piled what they considered to be the stories of the 10 most important people in history. The report is in chronological order, and the following is an original version that has not been altered by us yet. Some of the stuff in here must not be released to public, as it upends everything we know about history. Enki Urash's story. Enki Urash was born between 5000 and 4500 BCE. This reaches so far that the town can't give us that much information. To a tribe that believed that they were once a divine civilization that survived a great calamity. I managed to piece together that they believed this calamity wiped out most of their civilization and destroyed all technological progress. This is why when Enki Urash was around 13, he decided to separate from his tribe and to pursue archaeology. When he was around 18, he discovered an ancient vault. This vault cannot be unlocked by normal methods, and on his screen it said to Enki, in what seems to be an old version of Enki's language, that it needed a special device to open the vault. He then dedicated the next couple years of his life to find members of this tribe to help him unlock the vault. This is from a new tribe that was under Enki Urash's rule. When Enki was 25, he and his tribe discovered a key to the vault. The specific details cannot be acquired from the town, but whatever the key was, it worked. They discovered a vault filled with what seems to be an ancient technology that is more advanced in some areas than our own technology today. With this technology, they settled down in one place and started building permanent homes. When Enki Urash was in his 30s, which is usually near the end of one's life at this time, he made the call to conquer all tribes in the area and unite as one big civilization. He called it the Imperial Urash Dynasty. He also used a device that allowed him to see 50 years into the future. When he was around 35 years old, he used the machine to fully consume the other tribes into civilization. With that task being complete, he turned his eyes to learning how to perfectly replicate this technology. His people were ordered to build buildings dedicated to research and development. He had two twins named Laka Urash and Lako Urash. Laka Urash discovered one of the key fundamentals to reverse engineering the technology. He passed away when he was around his 40s. And this was shortly after his daughter made her discovery. I think Lako Urash became the ruler after Enki Urash. King Ramkhan Rusticus story. King Ramkhan Rusticus was born in 2381 BCE as a peasant. He was the first and only child as his mom died in childbirth. Between the ages 1 and 3, his father, Nakmar Rusticus, worked nearly to death so he could afford her to feed Ramkhan and himself. Fortunately, his father fell ill on his 4th birthday and couldn't work for several weeks. During this hopeless time, he swore that he would become king so that this wouldn't happen to anyone else again. Once word had reached whatever family his father had left, they helped heal him into recovery. When he was 5, his father managed to save up enough for a small split of land that could be farmed on. His father's plan was to buy more and more land with money from their crops and reinvest that money into more crops. At age 12, his father remarried and had a child. To make sure they could feed this new child, Ram-Khan left his home. He wandered for 2 years until he found the device that allows you to see 50 years into the future. With the insight of the device, he went to the capital of his kingdom and snuck into a meeting between the king and powerful nobles. He then managed to forge a document that made it seem more like one of the more powerful nobles wanted to overthrow the king. He dropped the document under the king's seat and waited for the king to freak out. The king ended up stripping the noble of his title and wealth. He declared that in the year the greatest peasant to show themselves shall replace the noble. The king set trials, and Ram-Khan studied beforehand with the help of the device. At age 15, he passed to the final trial on the 1-year anniversary of the king taking everything from that noble. It was the king judging the last 3 finalists. Ram-Khan hid a flintlock that he made in his pocket for this final challenge, as he knew that the king would not be able to decide who should replace the noble. The king instead told them to fight to death. Ram-Khan won with his flint knife and became a noble at 15. Little did the king know that Ram-Khan had a long plan to become king. He rallied the people with the story of him becoming a peasant that became a noble. All across the kingdom, his name became known. He transferred 1/4 of his newfound wealth to his father so that his family could enjoy wealth without being caught up in politics. At age 18, he married a noble woman named Annabellum. At age 20, he had his firstborn son named Bogli Rusticus. In the year 2361 BCE, a great famine swept across the country. But Ram-Khan had been prepared and made sure that his people were fed. This caused most of the other nobles to flock to Ram-Khan. He had made a working plan to capitalize over the many hands at his disposal. By the end of the Great Famine, which lasted a year, Ram-Khan was the strongest noble in his kingdom. Some argued that he was stronger than the king. When he was 21, he spoke out against the king raising taxes on peasants. When the king announced it to the masses, the king tried to do to Ram-Khan what he did to the noble before him. But the people loved Ram-Khan and hated the king. A riot broke out and the king was taken hostage. Ram-Khan forced the king to hand over rulership, or they would kill his family. The king agreed under the condition that they would be exiled with half of the crown's wealth in hand, and that he could take any loyalists who wished to come. His first act as king is to replace the noble position that he occupied with the poorest noble family he could find. His second act is to rename the kingdom to the Ram-Khan Empire. He then used devices to make a 31-year plan to create an empire where everyone is wealthy. Empire without proto-feudalism. He spent several days using the device until he was done with 21 of those years. As the device started flashing red, and it could only see 49 years into the future. In modern terms, we would consider that to be a battery low warning, but he had not encountered such a thing. When he completed his plan, the device could only see 47 years into the future. He chose to keep the information that his device, which very few knew about in the first place, was dying. First, a law that allowed knights to take and peasants as squires was passed. The peasants turned knights were allowed to become nobles through marriage. This plan required very little delay in making changes. He then made a college building initiative, which also aimed to change the culture to a more academic one. Many more changes occurred. All citizens were equal and deserved education. Expansion efforts were made to find new farmland. When he was 24 years old and his plan was 2 years in, everyone owned a house. The device could only see 46 years ahead. When he was 30 and his plan was 8 years in, his device was destroyed by a noble who realized the device would not report its own destruction. I wish the town was able to say who destroyed the device, but that was too long ago. Thankfully, the plan was a bunch of orders with dates on them that were written down. The nobles hated the idea that they would become no different than the peasants. With the destruction device, they planned a coup. King Ramcon used what little resources he could without messing up his plan to get a college to investigate how to restore the device. The college that was chosen and that had the broken device was known as IURE College, the Intellectual University of the Ramcon Empire College. They sent a few members to find schematics for the device, but they never returned. When he was 32 and his plan was 10 years, the nobles decided to strike. At a meeting with the nobles, they attacked him. Ramcon's dominant arm was broken and he was thrown in prison. The nobles told the people that he had left on a trip and left control to them until he was back. They decided to keep the plan until they were ready to publicly execute their king. The once great peasant turned king rotted away in a cell for a year. While he was in prison, he was tortured nearly to death every day. The torturers didn't show their spit faces and didn't say a word while they were torturing their king. When he was 33, the nobles declared that he had turned traitor and that they would stop doing his 31-year plan, as they claimed it would lead to the downfall of their empire. His wife found out about his imprisonment the day before they announced this and secretly informed the public of what happened. The day after the nobles announced that he was a traitor, they announced his public execution in the hands of his firstborn son. King Ramcon's head was under a new contraption that the colleges developed called the guillotine. This was meant to be the first time the guillotine would be used to execute someone. But a group of loyalists stepped in. They used a glass bottle filled with gunpowder and a string to cause distraction, while another person broke the guillotine. They grabbed King Ramcon and dashed away with him. They threw more of those glass bottles at the guards that were chasing him. King found himself fully healed by an ancient Eurasian artifact. They also became one of the physically strongest people within the Empire. And yes, the title of king and not emperor is accurate for this particular civilization. Plus, the speed at which he regenerates has more than tripled. The cost of his artifact is that it is destroyed when it is used. But this was important use. Soon, word spread, nobles' lies, and a civil war began. It was between those that believed the nobles and those that believed the king. War waged on for 5 years, in which his entire family was killed by the nobles. During this war, King Ramcon looked like he barely aged a single year. At age 38, he finally charged into the capital and sword-fought each of the nobles. He became known as the Mad King during his slaughter of the nobles who took everything from him. Once he won the war, he punished the surviving trained nobles by forcing their families to eat them alive. After all the nobles that did that coup all those years ago died, the families were next to be punished. In his eyes, they have not been punished yet. The spouses of the nobles will become servants for scouts that he plans on deploying to find a way to fix the device. The young children of the nobles that were too young to go out on their own were given to peasant families. The fully grown offspring of the trained nobles were stripped of all their wealth and land until the device was restored. The children that were adults but could go out on their own were forced to revoke their heritage and given knighthood. He continued the non-time dependent elements of his plan with some adjustments that should put it back on track, he hopes. He also sent 20 teams of scouts to find ways to restore the device. The scouts are exiled until one of them finds the solution. No scout found it, and therefore none were ever legally able to come back home within his lifetime. King Ramcon Rusticus died at age 101 with the successor that he chose. That successor's name was Queen Tabra Ragan. Amelia Flintstone story. Amelia Flintstone was born in 2066 BCE to a noble family. She was the youngest of 3 children. Her siblings are William Flintstone, 6 years her senior, Emma Flintstone, 2.5 years her senior. William is meant to inherit the manor and business, also 50% of the family's wealth, while Kalima is meant to inherit their extra land and 25% of the family's wealth. Nelia is also meant to inherit 25% of the family's wealth, but she gets nothing else. She has been interested in science and technology since the day she was born. While she was interested in tech from the day she was born, she didn't start tinkering until she was 12. Her disassembling wooden locks and reassembling them was her first step into what would later define her. Age 13, she learned about the myth of the Tome of Knowledge. It was a book written by the Russians before they were recently wiped out. Myth says that it was a compilation of several different scientific ideas of much older society of tech that seemed to be magical. According to Anelia, the Russians never reached the same level of technology as civilization that came before. At age 14, she promises several desperate people that she will cure them of whatever is making them desperate if they give her the Tome of Knowledge. At age 15, she created a full spy network. The network had noise contraptions that, when activated, told her that someone either found the Tome of Knowledge or a lead on the Tome of Knowledge. At 16, she invented 23 things that people had already made a better version of. At 17, a member of her spy network stole the Tome of Knowledge and wanted money to pay off their debt in exchange, and nearly happily spent all her monthly allowance to get the Tome of Knowledge. When she opened the book, she realized that it was in a language that she didn't understand. She asked for a book to help with understanding Eurasian from her family's library, but they had no such book. She would have to wait until the next month and go to different bookstores in search of what she needs. Once it was that month, she asked her family where a bookstore that has a Proto-Indo-European to Eurasian dictionary. They didn't tell her that a book like that can be acquired through a long-time family friend whose job is to study recently demolished cultures. On her 18th birthday, she was given that book. With the book, she was able to read several different schematics that casually mentioned different revolutionary scientific concepts. She learns that this book only contains how to make the artifacts that the Europeans found out about to reverse engineer. She learns that this book only contains how to make the artifacts that the Eurasians found out how to reverse engineer. It does, however, talk about theories about what the civilization before the Eurasians might have done to make their technology. It talks of an untapped energy within the cosmos that can be harnessed to do what most cultures consider to be magic. It was unknown to the Eurasians who they managed to tap into the energy, but their studying the different tech allowed them to notice patterns. It is the same energy that is the basis for all of our modern technology. With the clock knowledge of the book, she was able to reinvent steel, catapults, screws, mirrors, clockwork mechanisms, like gears and analog clocks. When she was 19, she invented the flintlock cannon. It was a cannon that used gunpowder that reacted when a giant piece of flint hit it. The cannon had a 50-50 chance of exploding instead of firing. But it was a powerful weapon if it didn't blow you and itself up. I speculate this is the actual place where Nana Flintstone first found the idea of flintlock. It's distant relative of Nana that invented flintlock and not her. Shortly after making the flintlock cannon, she was kicked out of her home to make a life and given 25% of her family's fortune early. With that money, she bought some land in a somewhat remote location and a house built. By the age of 20, she had everything she needed fully functioning and began work once more. She used her inheritance to get resources that she needed for her work. Her first huge project was building a mechanical body with the goal of giving it artificial life. When she was 22, she finally made a functioning frame out of gears and metal plates. She couldn't give it life. She had come to the realization that she would need to tap into the energy that the Russians were never able to. But she also knew that doing so was way beyond her. She had to find the Russian refugees and get them to help her. They had spent their entire lives trying to figure out how to tap into it. Surely they have a closer idea of the answer. So she hired people to take her to the nearest refugee camp. When she got there, she discovered that the number of Russians was fewer than the number of fingers on her hands. She attempted to ask them about how to tap into the energy of the civilization before, and learned that tapping into that energy was the thing that destroyed the Russians. The process of discovering the secret killed more than 99% of them, and the people who did it took the knowledge of how to the grave. One of them, who wanted to learn Aneli's language in exchange for him helping her trying to tap into this energy, came back from her trip. His name is Namtar Urash, and he assisted in the experiments to tap into that energy. With Namtar's help, Aliana learned how to properly speak Urashian, and she got the first leads in tapping into the energy. Namtar learned Proto-Indo-European from Aliana in her translation book. When Aliana was 23, she and Namtar figured out how to release a minuscule spark of that energy. Months later, they figured out how to get that energy to control the mechanical bodies. At 24, her fortune was running out, so she went to a wealthy town and sold some of her early inventions that weren't expensive to mass produce. She also asked her family for some money in exchange for an update on her life and some copies of Somatic that she knew they didn't care about. They sent around 3% of her family's fortune, which grew since the last time she saw them. She got equal to within 5% of her family's fortune, which left. At 25, her and Namtar's work gained the attention of Emperor Gotham. At this point, they were able to have mechanical bodies walk around and avoid objects. Emperor Gotham wanted to fund them to make powerful war machines using their technology. The Emperor wanted them to make a super soldier that wasn't human and therefore had no human weaknesses like morale. They had no choice but to agree, because they were getting low on money once more. They armed schematics with smaller versions of flintlock cannons that only had a 10% chance of self-destruction. At 26, she and Namtar got machines to successfully fire whatever target they were ordered to target. Several months passed, and they were combat ready. The Emperor declared war and used the machines to annex foreign lands. She also had a son named Akaro Urash, which was later changed to Aktaro Flintstone, to help him fit in with the society more. When she was 27, the Emperor asked them to make an explosive that would recreate what happened to the Russians on a smaller scale. At first, they were hesitant, but then the Emperor threatened to kill their son if they didn't comply. They spent the next year of their lives trying to recreate a smaller version of what Namtar survived from. They ended up creating it and named it the Ligarash explosive. When she was 29, the Emperor was killed by the enemy, stealing one of her bombs and killing him and his entire family with it. Shortly after the news of that, she learned that her parents were visiting the Emperor at the time of the attack, so they also died because of the bomb that she invented. Her brother, William Flintstone, was the new head of the Flintstone family. After what had transpired, she stopped inventing for a while. Her civilization had the blueprints to all of her stuff and could continue the war without her. During the time they stopped working, her government cut off all funding to her until she agreed to continue working with them. Neanderthal also proposed ideas on how they can make something to end the war. When she was 34, her money was almost dry. She decided to reconnect with her government. The war was getting stagnant without her, and people were starting to get drafted. They made a machine that could, in theory, create an explosion 3 times bigger than the one that wiped out the Eurasians. The machine was designed to sneakily go to the center of the enemy nation and self-destruct. In exchange for this machine, they would get a lifetime supply of food. Her government agreed to her deal. She only gave the machine and burned the schematics. 4 months later, they got the news that their enemies and most of their neighboring nations had been wiped out. A good portion of her own country was scorched by the explosion. She seemed to be incinerated at age 35 by mishap with the energy. She was trying to copy herself up, made of the energy, with hopes of learning how to better control it. Her son was 9 years old when she died, and it ended up being given to her brother by Neanderthal because Neanderthal was doing dangerous experiments to try and bring her back. Neanderthal would eventually suffer the same fate.